All right, at any rate, I'm waiting for staff to tell me we're ready. Good morning, Vanessa. Are we ready?
Yes, sir. Good morning. How are you? We're ready.
I'm fine, thank you. Okay, we're going to start. I'm going to order this public hearing or roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, March 10th, 2022. The subject of this morning's roundtable is status of DCPS Middle School in Center City. I'm going to read from the hearing notice. In 2013, Shaw Middle School was closed due to low enrollment and a deteriorating facility. At the same time, feeder elementary schools were struggling with under-enrollment. Since then, the three feeder schools have grown their enrollment substantially. Yet the committee continues to hear from families for whom the existing Cardozo feeder pattern does not best serve their needs. As a result, elementary schools in the feeder pattern are losing students in the upper grades, as some families with the ability to choose to pull their children out, to enroll them in charter and private schools. In other circumstances, families have moved. The co-location model of a middle school and high school at Cardozo does not seem to be serving many families effectively. In fiscal year 2020, the council put $1 million in the capital budget to begin the planning for a new Center City Middle School. Although the mayor did not act on that and instead proposed actually eliminating that budget in the next fiscal year, the council restored the capital funding, and currently there is $3 million in the fiscal year 2022 capital budget to plan a new middle school. The purpose of this hearing is to hear from DCPS as well as from parents and others interested in this issue about their plans, from DCPS's plans and timeline to determine need and to establish a new middle school to serve the families in the city center. We have 12 witnesses before we get to the government. I will say that the government had approached me about whether we needed to schedule or should schedule this hearing today, because the mayor is submitting her budget next week. My view was that having this hearing before we get the budget not only allows us more time to focus on this issue, but actually will help us as we consider the budget for next fiscal year. So there are advantages to having this hearing now, and this hearing is long overdue in that there has not been a hearing on this issue, I think at all, or discussion in the council for well over a year with regard to the middle school needs in the center city. Let me turn to my colleagues. I believe Councilwoman Nadeau, you were here first.
I was here before anybody. It's just me and the clock.
I hope the clock was a good companion. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, and I want to thank you, Chairman, for holding this roundtable and for all of your partnership on this issue over the years. I look forward to hearing from our public witnesses today. I'm always looking forward and thinking about ways that we can unite the community around education and schools. And even as an ANC commissioner and afterward, now as a ward council member, I've always been thinking about how we can bring Shaw Middle School back. And that is why I have consistently advocated for a center city school. This isn't a new issue for our community, our students, or our parents. A modernized school was promised years ago, and that's why I have been vocal and clear that we need to hold the executive accountable. And whether it's feasibility study, or more money in the budget for modernization, or restoration, I'm going to continue to support and advocate for our students and parents who are in desperate need of a middle school. In 2019, council, led by myself and my council member Allen, voted and approved an amendment to allow the construction of Banneker High School to move forward without delay at a new site and allow for the future modernization and reopening of the current Banneker High School building at 800 Euclid Street Northwest as a by right neighborhood DCPS middle school to serve the Shaw and Center City communities. Opening 1 year after Banneker High School vacates the 800 Euclid Street site. That was sent from a draft letter that we sent to, that was taken from a letter we sent to the chancellor. So that's why we're here today, to get updates from the executive on the progress with modernizing the building and hearing from parents who've been asking for a middle school for over a decade. Now, I know the question remains if it's Euclid Street or U Street or where we would put that school. But there is no question that we need it. There's no question that it was promised. And there's no question that the council stands behind this effort. So thank you, Chairman. I look forward to hearing from my other colleagues today about their commitments to this and also from our public witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you so much, Chair Mendelson, for holding this roundtable today. The status of standalone DCPS middle school and city center, and thank you to you and our colleagues, Councilmember Nadeau and Councilmember Allen, who share our belief that this is really important to get done. Thank you so much to all the parents who've taken time out of their day to testify today. We all agree that every DC family should be able to have confidence in their neighborhood DC public school. The fact that only around 12% of elementary school students in the city center feeder pattern attend Cardozo Middle School demonstrates clearly that the current system is not working for our families. The Chancellor has agreed with us in previous hearings that the co-location of a middle and high school on Cardozo's campus is not a model that best serves students. I feel for Principal Mola at Cardozo Education Campus, who has been tasked with overseeing both the high school and middle school, which is simply too much to ask one person, especially during COVID when principals are already under so much strain, and most importantly, too much to ask students and families. Everyone involved in this situation deserves better. Our parents deserve to have trust in their neighborhood DC public school. Our teachers and principals at our feeder elementary schools deserve to have consistent enrollment throughout all grade levels. And right now we're seeing in early grades that are bursting at the seams, but 4th and 5th grades are under enrolled as families pull their students from DCPS in favor of charter or private schools, or in some cases even moving out of the district. This creates instability for in and out of boundary students who are either pulled from their school community in the middle of elementary school or are not able to get a seat until 4th or 5th grade. And the teachers and school leaders at Cardozo High School deserve better. They deserve to be able to focus entirely on creating a high-performing high school, and a key to this is receiving students who have gone through a feeder pattern that prepares them to succeed. I have spoken to so many parent partners about the importance of this school, students, parents, teachers, principals, and we all seem to be on the same page that we need a standalone Center City Middle School. And thus I continue to be surprised by the pushback we've received from the executive. My colleagues and I put $3 million in the FY 2022 budget for the design phase of the Center City Middle School. We even gave the executive autonomy to determine the best location for the school, yet the funding has still gone unused. DCPS and the Deputy Mayor for Education are arguing that there's not enough demand for a standalone middle school. However, I don't agree with this argument. We need to see data-driven explanation for this argument. Are we concluding that because only 12% of families in the Center City feeder pattern are sending their kids right now to Cardozo, that there's no demand for a standalone middle school? We should be doing everything in our power to ensure that all DC families can send their children to DCPS schools. So I'm looking forward to hearing directly today from our public witnesses and Deputy Mayor Kine. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important roundtable.
Thank you, Council Member. I'm now going to call in the witnesses. All of the non-government witnesses. David Alpert, who's president of the Ward 2 Education Council. Kathy Riley, who's with the Ward 4 Ed Alliance. Anne Louise Taylor, who's a member of Parents for Center City / Shaw Middle School. Paul Flaherty, Mark Eisenberg, who's a Seton Elementary School parent. Kathleen Cochran, who's also a Seton Elementary parent. Hubertus Sugarling, Sarah Warren, Adam Taylor, Suki Lusur, Andrea Haynes, and Mary Filardo. Ms. Filardo is with the 21st Century School Fund. We have a 4-minute clock, and please be mindful if you're in gallery view, you should see the clock in the top row. We'll begin with Mr. Alpert. Good morning.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you and good morning. The Cardozo feeder pattern as it is structured is not meeting the needs of many families in Ward 2 elementary schools. We need the administration to work with stakeholders to develop a plan to build a strong and successful feeder pattern. At the elementary schools in the feeder pattern, large kindergartens give way to very small 5th grades. Many parents spend the elementary years thinking about what they will do for middle or high school. Many who can afford to move to the Wilson boundary or Maryland or Virginia. Others try to lottery into charter schools or DCPS schools out of boundary, or apply to private schools if means permit. Parents without those options are left behind. Could mistrust of the matter of right middle schools and high school options be misguided? After all, school decisions are often based on a school's reputation as well as fact. It's difficult to know what impact there really is of sending, for instance, a student on grade level to a school with currently low test scores. I've talked to staff at Cardozo and have been impressed. But if Cardozo is indeed a fantastic school, DCPS is simply not talking to parents about the value of going there. The STAR system has received much criticism, but at the moment, one of its functions is as a guide to parents making decisions. At the moment, that system gives Cardozo 1 star, which tells people to look elsewhere. If that's not the city's message, then the city needs another one. But the city also communicates no other option. So parents here, you probably should just leave. So what should be done? There are various options. I'm not here today to tell you the answer. My preference would be to see an inclusive participatory process where officials and stakeholders work together to consider the options and build consensus. The voices of the Cardozo parents and staff are important, as are at Francis Stevens and all of the elementary schools. Should the middle school move out of Cardozo? Perhaps that's best. Or perhaps the equivalent money for a new school could set up a fully separate middle school in the Cardozo building akin to Czech. Maybe that would be possible, but maybe not. Have we studied it? Maybe the other feeders can all join Francis Stevens in a bigger middle school at the Francis Stevens location, or the Francis Stevens Middle School simply stays in its swing space permanently as a larger school with more feeders. Perhaps there can be coordination with area charter schools. Perhaps there are even more creative ideas. And whatever we do with middle schools, parents also need and want a healthy and successful high school, or they will continue to leave the feeder pattern, and often DCPS entirely. We need efforts to support and strengthen Cardozo, no matter what happens with middle school. Any of these plans need buy-in from the existing school communities, so parents in all the schools feel a change is done with them, not to them. I and the Ward 2 Education Council are eager to support any inclusive planning process and build toward a feeder pattern that serves all students. The Ward 2 Education Council will be discussing the middle school feeder pathway at our next meeting on Wednesday, March 30th, and people can sign up to join that meeting at ward2edcouncil.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alford. Kathy Riley.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of a standalone DCPS middle school to feed into Cardozo High School at the former Banneker site. I am Kathy Riley, a 40-year resident of Ward 4 and convener of the Ward 4 Education Alliance and director of the Senior High Alliance of Parents, Principals, and Educators, also a member of C4DC. I believe that our DCPS infrastructure of neighborhood schools as the democratically managed public education institution in our city is crucial and worth fighting for. It requires vision and commitment. Chairman, on January 18th, 2012, you and I were both at Coolidge High School when the Roosevelt and Coolidge communities came together despite their strong competition with one another, to say we wanted both high schools. The very real threat, driven by data on school quality, facility capacity, and programmatic demand at the time, was that only one high school should be modernized. One should close and not be modernized. This is the same language used to say that we don't need a Center City middle school. Over 100 people attended that meeting, and with your help, we prevailed in keeping both schools open and invested in. Both now have projected enrollments of over 800. Both have vibrant, in-demand quality programs, despite predictions to the contrary. Again, we came to DCPS after the closure of McFarland in 2013, and the statement from our elected leaders that no one will ever come to McFarland. We looked at the program offerings at Deal and at what our Ward 4 schools were able to offer 6th through 8th graders in our K-8 schools. Our schools are excellent, and they worked hard with their middle school students. But they couldn't compete with the multiple course offerings in language, math, social studies, and the extensive extracurricular opportunities of the larger standalone Deal. The student assignment recommendations of 2014 echoed our belief. They stated, based on their extensive engagement and analysis, that DCPS should open up 2 middle schools in Ward 4 to feed into Roosevelt and Coolidge, one in the center of the city to be a standalone feeder to Cardozo, and one in Ward 7 to feed into Woodson. McFarland was swing space for Roosevelt and for Marie Reed. It was modernized while students were in part of the building. It was reopened in 2018 as the feeder school to Roosevelt after persistent advocacy. We were told there was nothing that could overcome that negative stereotype. McFarland has been right at or over its 590 capacity. It's thriving. Roosevelt is projected at 868 and constrained as it shares its building with State. We were initially told the data did not support a middle school for Coolidge, that Brightwood, Tacoma, Whittier, and LaSalle as feeders were insufficient. We worked with DCPS on using the larger Coolidge building and budget to support 2 separate schools. This required sacrifice and lots of work in that community. DCPS very cautiously agreed to a 600 student high school and a 400 student middle school at this location. IDB Wells is projected at 550 and Coolidge at 812 for next year. My point is that data analysis is only one element, and it does not take into account what our vision for this city is, what passionate citizens want, or what can change. There is increased crowding in the DCPS facilities in this part of the city. These families testifying today have been persistent and tenacious in their desire for a by-right standalone middle school and their commitment to work with Cardozo as their high school of right, just as the families in Ward 4 work with Roosevelt and Coolidge. Let's make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Ann Louise Taylor.
Thank you, council members. My name is Ann Louise Taylor. I'm a parent of a 2nd grader and a preschooler at Seton Elementary and a member of Parents for Center City Shaw Middle School. I'm testifying in favor of a new middle school for the Cardozo feeder pattern. DCPS does not offer the same educational opportunities to middle school students at most education campuses as it can at a standalone middle school. This is true at Cardozo, where the middle school program shares classrooms, a principal, and a budget with the high school, its international program, and its Trans STEM Academy. The modernized Cardozo building offers a range of academics, world languages, and extracurriculars for high school students, but it was not designed for middle schoolers. It does not have capacity for larger middle school enrollment that would support full programming offered at other schools, such as school-wide enrichment and a variety of age-appropriate arts, sports, and other activities. 6th grade enrollment for this program is consistently only 40 to 50% of the graduating students from the 3 Tier 1 feeder elementaries. Historically, the middle grades test scores have been below the high schools, but this is an opportunity. DCPS's leading prospect to increase student retention in this feeder pattern is in this middle school. The other middle schools that feed into Cardozo are also associated with other high schools, at check and school without walls. The best way for DCPS to give our feeder pattern the support it needs is to increase enrollment in the middle school that is most closely associated with Cardozo. Our Center City community has been asking the city for 12 years to find a permanent home for the middle school students in the Cardozo feeder pattern. DCPS is moving away from the education campus model in other parts of the city, and it has seen success with new middle school campuses in Ward 4 and Ward 5. Additionally, Cardozo has been projected to reach its enrollment capacity in the next few years, leaving inadequate capacity for a larger middle school. It's time for DC to seize the opportunity it has with the vacant Banneker building and fulfill its responsibility to these students. I'm asking the mayor and the council to include sufficient funding in the FY23 CIP to modernize the old Banneker building for a new middle school in the Cardozo feeder pattern. Banneker will be available in the fall of 2024 when Francis Stevens is done using it as swing space. The 2020 feasibility study DCPS commissioned estimates the modernization will cost 70 to 75 million. The city's capital budget this year is expected to receive significantly more than this from the FY21 surplus. Our city's schools always have many competing priorities, and there are many feeder patterns that need improvements. Now is the time to give Center City Middle a home where it can prepare its students to thrive in high school and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Paul Flaherty.
Yes, hello. My name is Paul Flaherty. I'm a parent of a preschooler and a soon-to-be preschooler who go to Seton Elementary School. I'm also a member, supporter of the Parents for Center City Shaw Middle School group. Seton Elementary has been our neighborhood in-boundary school. We reside just a couple of blocks away. I'm testifying in strong support in favor of a new middle school for the Cardozo feeder pattern. This issue matters to me as a parent and as a resident of the city and as a member of this community who's concerned with the broader investments made in those who live and who are educated here. In recent years, as a parent of young children, I've learned a good deal more about DCPS and education policy, in part from that work that's been done by the Parents for Center City Shaw Middle School and what they've undertaken. And so I reflect and support that perspective and the analysis and commitment here that Aunt Louise has given voice to better than I could. I would finally just say that I strongly support the creation of a new middle school here in Shaw Center City. Something that has been, from what I gather, it's taken a great deal of time, more than it should, to have this issue resolved. I've spoken with many other parents of young children here in the neighborhood. We really love this community here that we have in Shaw, are deeply committed to DC public schools, ones like Seton, which we're very happy with. And we want to make sure that our kids are given the best chances for success and staying in their community here and for the best kind of public education they can get. Our city schools always have a lot of competing priorities. There are many feeder patterns that need improvements, but I really think and hope that this can generate the resolve to give Center City a middle school, the kind of middle school that can prepare its students to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Mark Eisenberg.
Good morning. I want the city to keep its promise to reopen Shaw Junior High School. There isn't currently a middle school in our neighborhood. The research confirms that there already is tremendous need and growing need for a middle school to return to this location. It's been promised over and over again for a long time. My name is Mark Eisenberg. I've lived within a mile of Shaw Junior High School for over 30 years. I can't believe it, but it's true. My wife, Nora, and I have two small children, Mose, age 6, and Sam, age 3. Both are having a great experience at Seton Elementary School. 4 years ago, we moved from one home in Shaw to another slightly larger home here in Shaw. And this was vacated by a family who also had two small kids. They chose to move away for better schools. We chose to move into their home because we believe in the promise of better schools for our kids, and we're happy to help work for it. We need you, the city's leaders, to help us in working for that as well. And I'm grateful for those of you who've already done this. I really want to cheer you on to continue doing it. As you know, and as Anne Louise was much more eloquent than I was, at present, there isn't a path of schools in Shaw for our kids to take. It's not just our children, but every child in DC is entitled to a full path in their neighborhood, full path for a great education. We were promised this path. That promise was broken in not renovating and reopening a middle school across from Seton Elementary School. Like David Albert said, I'm certainly open-minded about what the solution is. We desperately want to stay here. I mean, living in Shaw is a huge part of who I am and who we are as a family. And we're happy to have our children and our money stay here. But again, we need you as leaders to help us. We're begging to stay here. In addition, just a quick reminder, it's years gone by, but I feel like there was a lack of transparency in how the decisions around Banneker changed. How that came to pass wasn't transparent. I see this issue of Shaw Middle School as an opportunity to not fulfill a promise, maybe because it's also at a place on the map where many wards intersect. And I'm not sure this type of promise would have been broken if it were to happen in the heart of a single ward. Lastly, just quickly, I recognize that I'm in a really privileged situation here. I have a type of job that allows me the flexibility to make time to participate in this roundtable. Not all of my neighbors are able to do so. I don't speak in an official capacity for any of them, but I want the council members to know that this type of conversation happens on a near daily basis with other Seton parents that pick up and drop off. It's a constant refrain of what are we going to do about 6th grade? And it's really up to you to help fulfill this promise and reopen our middle school. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenberg. Kathleen Cochran.
Yes, Cochran. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, council members, and good morning. My name is Kathleen Cochran, and my husband, Sri Katragada, and I moved from Manhattan to Shaw in 2014 because even as we were leaving New York, we still wanted to live in a vibrant central city community, and we found that here in Shaw. We welcomed our first daughter, Pearl, in 2015, and our younger daughter, Ruby, in 2017. And both of our kids have attended Seton Elementary School, beginning with pre-K 3. Pearl is now in kindergarten, learning how to read, and Ruby is in pre-K 4, working on writing her letters. We strongly support the creation of a new middle school in the Shaw Center City area. The combination of the middle and high school together at Cardozo is not conducive to the best learning environment for our middle schoolers. A revitalized former Banneker building would be convenient for parents in Ward 6, tailored to our middle school students, and committed to inclusivity to reach all of our Center City students, just like Seton has proven to be over the past several years. I know that there are many others, there are so many others like me who love the diverse and beautiful community we have in Shaw, are committed to our DC public schools, and want to make sure our kids are being given the best chances for success in their public school education. We can do that right here in our community. A new Center City middle school is exactly what we need to continue serving the needs of our children as they grow older. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Bertus Jürgen, and I mispronounced the name. Are you here? I do not see you. Sarah Warren. I thought I saw Sarah Warren.
I think she had to step out for a meeting and intends to return quickly. I'll text her.
Okay, please. Adam Taylor.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, council members. My name is Adam Taylor. I am the president of the Seton Elementary School PTO. Today, I'm testifying in my personal capacity as the parent of a second grader and a preschooler at Seton. We love Seton as a school and a community more than I can say. It's a Title I school with no single majority demographic group. Families at our school are a bit over 1/3 Hispanic, around 1/3 Black, and the rest are roughly split between Mandarin speaking and non-Hispanic white families. It's an awesome community. During the first part of the pandemic, as everything shut down, the school community and neighborhood rallied together from a distance to raise tens of thousands of dollars specifically to support families that were facing job and income losses from COVID shutdowns. The PTO at that time was solely focused on helping the Seton community help each other. We leaned on the amazing staff of the school who were teaching during a pandemic to make sure resources went directly to families who needed it. My wife and I every day see the tapestry of friends and schoolmates our kids are learning and playing with, and I want so badly for them to be able to keep growing up together when they graduate onto middle school. Families at Seton are overwhelmingly happy with the education their kids are receiving, and as you've heard today, they want the stability of the expectation that their kids will continue together through middle school to be prepared for high school and their lives afterward. But we know from DCPS data that unless something changes, that's extremely unlikely to happen. We know that the majority of rising sixth graders in the Cardozo feeder pattern will enter the lottery and go elsewhere. We know that nearly 90% of students with in-boundary rights to middle school seats at Cardozo will not exercise them. We know that this middle grade's capture rate is among the lowest in DCPS. What breaks my heart even more are the families who felt forced to make that choice before fifth grade. There's something of an attendance cliff between pre-K 4 and kindergarten as families look ahead and find what they see unacceptable. They aren't waiting until fourth or fifth grade to make decisions about middle school. It starts in preschool. We've known so many families in our 4 years at Seton who have moved their children into other DCPS feeders or into charters specifically because of the middle school question. That includes a Cardozo High School alum and former PTO officer at Seton who was adamant that their child would not go to middle school there, no matter how much they love Seton. They lotteried into the Hardy pattern for kindergarten. What's done is done, but every year that another cohort of middle schoolers is scattered to the wind is a loss for our center city neighborhoods and the 3 Title I elementary schools that make up the Cardozo feeder pattern. Something has to change. DCPS surveys from their 2019 middle school engagement process show that families here across demographic lines want a standalone middle school that can offer the academic experience and extracurriculars that all kids in this city should have access to. Experience confirms that the majority of the community doesn't see a small middle grades program folded into a high school as viable. For the better part of a decade, since Shaw at Garnet Patterson was closed and the middle grades were moved into Cardozo, which was sold as a temporary solution, families have voted with their feet and chosen something else. Going back to the closure of the standalone Shaw Junior High on the site where the beautiful new Banneker High School sits, folks here have begged and pleaded with DCPS to open a new middle school for the center of the city, and we're still asking. With the large influx of capital funding from the surplus announced by the CFO in December, the time to add a standalone middle school to the capital improvement plan is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Suki Lusur. I don't think she's here. Is Andrea Haynes?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, Chairman Mendelson, members of the City Council, good morning. My name is Andrea Haynes, and I am a proud parent of a DCPS preschooler at Seton Elementary School. I first moved to the district in 2005. I met my husband here, and we are raising our 5-year-old son, John, and 1-year-old daughter, Maggie, here in the city. When it came time to begin planning our family, we had to decide whether we would stay in the city we had come to love and consider our own, or move somewhere in the greater DMV. In the 12 years that we lived in DC before having our son, we saw the constant exodus out of the city of our friends who started families and decided to move. Invariably, when we asked, the topic of schools always came up. We made the conscious decision to stay in the district. We did so with the firm belief that the quality of early childhood programs and elementary schools in the district was better than the picture painted in the minds of the parents who left. We have only good things to say about John's pre-K 3 experience, even with the logistical nightmare that was remote learning. And John is thriving at Seton in pre-K 4 this year and says that his school, quote unquote, fills his heart with rainbows. As our family grows, however, we are concerned that without a quality standalone middle school for John and his friends to transition into, we will be forced to reevaluate our decision to stay in the district. This is troubling considering that you can see that our decision to stay is one that is being replicated throughout the district. More and more families are deciding to make DC their permanent residence and committing to raising children that are a product of the DC public school system, and thereby making the system more racially and economically diverse. Research has shown that diverse learning environments lead to numerous academic, cognitive, and social benefits for students, including improved student academic achievement and high school graduation rates, and preparation for diverse collegiate and work environments. This diversity improves outcomes for all students of all racial backgrounds. It can be one of the shining facets of the school system if we all work to support it. And frankly, to do that, we must ensure that we have high quality school options throughout the entire elementary and secondary system. If not, we'll see the decision to leave the district not defeated, but delayed, with parents looking to move when their children are 10 or 11, not 3 or 4. Building a new Center City Middle School would be a huge opportunity to secure a diverse school system for another generation. It's pivotal to keeping families in the district, and the council should allocate any extra resources to this timely need. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Mary Flaherty.
Good morning. I'm Mary Filardo. I'm the Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund, and I've been an educational facilities researcher, planner, and advocate here in the District of Columbia since the 1980s. My 3 children spent their entire pre-K 12th grades in DCPS schools, and I now have 3, soon to be 4 grandchildren attending their neighborhood DCPS schools in Ward 4. Through my work at the 21st Century School Fund, I've had the opportunity to work with community groups and school districts on educational facilities policy and planning in New York City, Philadelphia, Chicago, Miami-Dade, and Volusia counties in Florida, San Francisco and LA Unified Districts in California, and Durham Public Schools in North Carolina. And I'm here today to encourage the mayor and DCPS to make the education planning and facility modernization of a standalone middle school at the historic Banneker Junior High School, in fact it was, a priority. In an extensive citywide engagement process starting in 2013, the Deputy Mayor of Education, DCPS, and community groups reached a consensus on a framework and recommendations for the organization of public schools in the District of Columbia. Let's see, where is this now? The foundation for this organization of schools is the by right pathways from early childhood through high school that are called feeder patterns. This by right system is the foundation for equity and for quality in the District of Columbia. The lottery system of choice with DCPS out of boundary charter and application schools is a secondary or complementary system. The District of Columbia has been a national leader in the modernization of its comprehensive high school facilities as the endpoint of this feeder pathway. But except in the Wilson feeder pathway, our middle school modernizations and programming have been slow to support the high school pathways. As a result, families leave their feeder pathways out of concern for middle school education, which you're hearing very clearly from parents of young children from Seton. And this is, it's clear they're not sending their kids to a 612 as a first choice. And this is not only a problem for the middle school, but it's a problem for Cardozo high schools. Without a strong feeder, means fewer class options in the high school, fewer students and fewer class options, fewer co-curricular and athletic opportunities, and a less comprehensive educational experience for students at Cardozo and at the middle school. And this is why the school organization recommendations of opening a Center City Middle School, which Kathy Riley referenced, were made in the student assignment process. And I mean, one of the things that I think is missed in this is that there are so many exciting opportunities that open up by creating a standalone middle school at the historic Banneker Junior High School site on Euclid Street. One of the key things is that students will actually be able to attend a large middle school with an enrollment of up to 800 students. What this means is within a middle school, there are extensive academic and co-curricular activities so that students actually can make choices within their school, not just between schools. Students in the middle school at Banneker on Euclid Street have ample space for outdoor recreation and athletics because of its adjacency to the Banneker recreation area. The other important and exciting thing about a standalone middle school at Euclid Street is its incredible resource of Howard University, which is right, up the street, which can give, young students, middle school grade students, a window into the expansive world of academia and how diverse and fascinating this can be. The success of high schools depends on the middle schools. Only with strong feeder pathways will DCPS ensure equity and quality. Opening a standalone middle school at the historic Banneker Junior High School site will be a legacy this mayor and council can be proud of, and really encourage, I think the mayor's been the obstacle, but encourage her that this is something really worth making a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flaherty. I see that Suki Lucier has joined us.
Hi, thank you. Apologize for the difficulties there. I'm the parent of a 5th grader at Seton Elementary who's been there since pre-K 4. And Seton Elementary has given my child and all of the children who attend it so many gifts. Dedicated, loving, even award-winning teachers and administrators, an amazing outdoor space, and a focus on holistic wellness. But there's been no greater gift that he has received than being part of a spectacularly diverse cohort. Seton is literally the most diverse DCPS elementary school, and thanks to them offering preschool there, this cohort that he has been part of has been together since pre-K. And we've had the opportunity to witness benefits that being part of such a diverse, cohesive cohort has had on the children, their families, and on the school. But thanks to the lack of a true neighborhood middle school, we have sadly found that it was literally impossible to keep this cohort together during the transition from elementary to middle school. This is particularly frustrating since middle school is a time when social connections and support are so crucial. The uncertainty around middle school in the center city was stressful to my 5th grader, who was unlikely to know which school he would attend until well into the spring. And I can only imagine how stressful it would be for the at-risk families and students that are part of our group. Through our research into the feeder patterns into the city and the successful academic cohorts, we were dismayed to find that the Wilson feeder pattern seems to be the only one that offers the ability for students to be part of a true cohesive cohort. And for our family, as we researched if we would be able to be part of that feeder pattern, we found that despite being 2 parents with good jobs and having a lot of resources, it was still going to be difficult or out of reach for us to join that family. It certainly would be for the more at-risk families that are at Seton. For us in the end, the middle school decision has actually driven us out of the city together. When we looked at what it would cost us as a family to be able to continue to be a part of the DCPS system and have a feeder pattern for our child and a cohort, it was too great a cost. And we are actually moving to back to my husband's hometown in Ohio this summer, in large part because we know what kids my school is going to attend. We know what intermediate school he's going to attend. We know what middle school he's going to attend. We know what high school he attends. And we know that he's going to be able to have a cohort all through that and all of the benefits. We have the ability to do that. That is an incredible privilege to be able to pick up and move somewhere across the country, to be able to give those gifts to your child. We shouldn't have to do that. And all of the families at Seton shouldn't have to do that. No family in this city should have to face the choice of moving or schlepping their kid across the city to be able to give them a quality education. Every family should have access to quality schools from pre-K up through high school in their neighborhood. And DCPS has done some great work there at the elementary school level. And we're dropping the ball in middle school, and it's such a shame. And if it's affecting families like mine, incredibly privileged families, you can only imagine the effect it's having on families throughout the system. So there is a solution here, and it's to give our kids a Center City Middle School at the Banneker location. And the council can make it happen, and the time is now before we lose any more families. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucier. And I don't see that Sarah Warren has joined us. A couple of you did not have statements for us, and if you could provide them, that would be helpful, Miss. Let's see, Mr. Taylor, Miss Lucier, Ms. Haynes. So if you could submit your testimony, I'd appreciate that. We have to file a record, and given how this issue has gone on for several years, it's helpful to have a record that folks can refer to. We're going to have one round of questions from council members. I will start. I think I'll begin with Mr. Albert. You're the head of the Ward 2 Education Council. The feeder schools for Cardozo Middle School are 3.
Yes, that's right. Seton, Garrison, and Cleveland. Seton and Garrison, which are in Ward 2 now with the redistricting. Seton moved, and Cleveland, which is in Ward 1. Also, Ross and Thompson feed into Francis Stevens Middle School, Francis Stevens Education Campus, the middle school of Francis Stevens Education Campus. Currently, in the original boundary plan, the plan stated that when Shaw was reopened, those 2 schools should feed into the reopened Shaw as well. That was some time ago, and some people at those schools want to keep going to Francis Stevens, and some people don't want to go to Francis Stevens. So that's an unclear element at this moment. Of course, there's no progress on having a middle school anyway, so nothing, there's nothing happening.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So Ross and Thompson feed into Francis Stevens.
Right.
Stevens, what's their enrollment look like?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me. They have, their middle school is also, smallish, not unlike many DCPS middle schools, smaller than the numbers that DCPS has stated they would like to see for a future.
Okay, so Francis Stevens is not crowded, but there is some pressure on Hardy, isn't there?
Right, and Francis Stevens is basically full in the building that it is now. I believe it is a little bit over capacity currently between the elementary and the middle school. There, as I understand it, the modernization, which is going to start next year, is supposed to add some capacity to it, though, I don't think that has enough capacity to take in all the other schools as it's being designed right now. It could be designed bigger. I don't know, maybe it can't, but it doesn't have the space for a lot more people to go to the middle school. I also suspect it may become more crowded once the modernization leads to more people in boundary wanting to go. And to your question, Hardy is bumping up against its capacity and is not really taking out of boundary people at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's more than bumping. It's like jammed. That was the testimony most recently with regard to, I think what I'm getting at here, not so much that I want to make the point, but to bring out in the testimony. So we've heard from parents, primarily at Seton, but I'm pretty sure that the other schools, parents would say the same thing, that the parents feel they don't have a choice, and they don't like that. They want to have a choice, so they have a feeder. But what I'm trying to draw out here is to what extent this has an adverse impact on other middle schools. And what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Albert, you are the head of the Ward 2 Education Council. So these other middle schools are in your, or the parents from them are in your council. Is those schools, they need a little bit of relief, more Hardy perhaps than Francis Stevens, but they need some relief. And that would be another argument for a more attractive, popular, more fully enrolled middle school, new Center City Middle School. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would say in 2 ways I agree with it. One is you're right that people are trying to go out of boundary to schools like Hardy, but now mostly unsuccessfully because of the challenges with the middle school. The other thing is that, maybe you're alluding to this, is that people simply move into the Hardy boundary or the Deal boundary. We know many families that have done that because of their lack of feeling of happiness with their middle school, and I would say also high school options. And then that contributes to the crowding, because then they have a right to go to those schools, Deal, Hardy, and Wilson, which are overcrowded. So, Kathy talks about this in regards to Ward 4 as well, like the degree to which DCPS doesn't successfully do something in, or didn't previously, is causing crowding elsewhere.
So let me sort of ask Ms. Solardo if you could comment on this, because you've looked at facilities, you've actually looked at this issue with a Banneker Middle School for some time. Can you comment on the line of questioning I've just pursued?
Yeah, I mean, part of what's going on is a quality assessment by the mayor that somehow parents won't choose the DCPS option, even though what we can see at Hardy, Deal, Francis Stephen middle grades, McFarland, Ida B. Wells, that they are making those choices. And right now, what the city's opting to do, frankly, is open up charter middle grades. There's over 49 charter schools that offer middle grades across the city, and there's only 24 DCPS locations that are offering middle grades. And so what I don't understand is the deputy mayor's sort of notion in terms of projections that there is not a demand for middle grades either in Center City or kind of broadly across the city. I think that it's their own biases getting in the way. It's not real projections, because they were wrong about Ida B. Wells. They were wrong about McFarland. They were, wrong about any number of places that have picked up enrollment after modernization and after investment in programming. And, we can see it in many places when they finally do these middle school processes with their communities and planning on the education side and modernization. The parents, they show up. I mean, they didn't go to Deal. I mean, you remember, Phil, right? When parents, my kids went to Oyster and, they were counseled not to go to Deal, don't go to Deal. And many didn't. I mean, it was a school of less than 800 and it's over 1,400 now. And so, the fact that by planning, you don't just react to your past, you make your future. And I think that what you're hearing so eloquently from the people testifying is that why aren't we making this future for our families in the city? And I think DCPS was, in the district in terms of its investment in secondary at the high school level is really amazing. I mean, this is what I'm saying. I see it across the nation. They haven't done it. But you can't leave the gap of the middle schools and expect these incredible places and spaces to flourish if you're not investing in your middle grades. And even with Anacostia and Blue and they're reimagining those high schools, if they don't get on the ball on Kramer and Sousa and Hart and Johnson, those great high schools will not be able to thrive in the way that they really can and should. So I just don't understand why this administration doesn't support the middle school and the secondary investments in the programming and in the facilities. It's sort of mysterious to me.
And Ms. Riley, that was the point of your testimony, that what they're saying about middle school, a separate middle school from Cardozo, is what they were saying a decade ago about new schools in Ward 4. The enrollment wasn't there. Am I understanding this correctly? Enrollment wasn't there. And so why do we do this?
Oh, it was such a fight, Phil. And a testament to the parents here that they gave up a lot, by taking only the Coolidge investment and splitting it. And DCPS said, you'll never get 400 for that middle school. You'll never get 600 for the high school. And they're well beyond that. So the crowding at McFarland and Ida B. Wells could partly be somewhat relieved by a middle school. We're all on the same corridor. We have 6 middle schools feeding into McFarland. And right now McFarland is right at 590, and it's the only middle school feeding into Roosevelt. But yes, my point is that their data, as Mary said, doesn't look at the vision or at the passion of what we want. It's kind of saying, well, there's not enough kids in the 6th grade or the 5th grades at these elementary schools. But of course, what they do is pick up many other children who want a quality, larger middle school program. So it's very, I don't understand why we haven't done this. I mean, the mayor lived in Ward 4, and when she became mayor, she did keep some of her promises that she made as a council member. So we benefited. That's why Coolidge came about, partly. But it's not fair that in Ward 1, 6 and 5 here too, that they don't get this middle school. It will benefit everybody in DCPS to have a strong middle school in the center of the city. And we are losing these families. I mean, we're still fighting to keep our families in Ward 4 into our secondaries, even though we have them. So I wouldn't say the fight is over, but it's helped to have the modernization and have the middle school.
I'm virtually out of time. I wanted to ask some of the parents to say more about the choices, but maybe one of my colleagues will do that, not to just make some. Councilmember Nadeau, you're next.
What did you want to
Thank you.
ask more about, Chairman?
Just the parents to speak more about these choices and whether it's just the parents who are seeing, or how broad is these conversations in the schools?
Yeah, well, we can get into that. And I kind of want to talk about the elephant in the room as it relates to that. Because in the conversations that some of these parents and some of my Ward 1 parents have had in the past with the mayor, I think it's really centered around this. Okay, well, y'all say you want this school. Are you really going to put your kids in it? Right? And how do we build the confidence in that? And then the other elephant in the room being, you don't see a lot of people of color testifying today. And I know that there are a lot of children of color that go to these schools. But over the past several years, we've been having these conversations and not a lot of parents of color have shown up. And I think that is a factor for political leaders making these decisions in the executive branch. And I would love, I think we also have a challenging format, right? This is the middle of the workday. Not everybody has the privilege to take off time to testify, right? So I'm just going to throw this out here and see, Chairman asked about choices families are making. I'm asking to call the question, do we think parents that are advocating for this will really put their kids in the schools? And what are you hearing from your friends and neighbors and colleagues in the schools? More both color. I see we do have some people of color here. But how do we grapple with that in this conversation?
I guess I would just say, I think DCPS is responsible for that problem that you're talking about. They are not interested in engaging with the community. We have tried to get them to do that, and there have been lots of meetings, all sorts of things like that. But it's not an actual desire to change or fix anything. So that's why.
So I found through informal conversations, like I mentioned, we're gifted to have this great cohort, which means we also have had parents that have known each other for a long time and have really open, honest conversations. And I have actually just anecdotally found the greatest resistance to sending kids to Cardozo. It actually comes from our African-American parents and also from our Hispanic parents.
Yes.
A lot of our parents that are from DC, they came up through the Shaw system. We have a number of those parents who actually are from our neighborhood. They would love for it, but they are dead set against sending their children to Cardozo. I think they've also, unfortunately, like Anne-Louise said, they've have been a group that has historically not been heard and been represented. And I think in some ways maybe has some fatigue on dealing with this issue. People sometimes like to say that this group of white parents is, this is the new thing they're bringing up. There have been people in the neighborhood fighting for a Shaw Middle School since Shaw Middle School went away. This is not a new effort. I think there's some burnout on that original group because you can only run into a wall for so long before you kind of say, okay, nothing is going to happen.
And I was there. And their kids are grown.
And so I think then
right?
they kind of passed the baton to this group. And, we got another group in, we've seen this middle school. And so I think that's some of what you're seeing there. I also think, especially for Seton, where we really have language diversity, that has been a huge barrier. We have families that really are not comfortable participating in things in English. And even as we found, you can do translators and stuff, but I think things that are really focused on addressing our Spanish families, and the meeting is in Spanish. It's with our Mandarin families, and it's in Mandarin. There's a number of meetings we've had with this city about this issue that has been somebody from our school has said, are we going to have translation? And it's been like, oh, translation? Yeah, I guess we can do that. It should be a given. It shouldn't be somebody has to request. There will be translation for this meeting. What do we need to do to make it possible for you to participate in this? And that has not happened. So unfortunately, what you end up is some of that aggregating up where people come to us, they share their concerns, and then we're in a position to be able to share them with you. But there needs to be more access points so that those people can directly share their opinions, because what I've heard is they don't like this either, but they should be able to express that directly for themselves.
I just want to underline what Suki and Anne Louise are talking about. I mean, the person I know that has the strongest feelings about not sending their child to Cardozo, and by the way, I lived here probably 25 years saying Cardozo, so only now do I think I'm saying it correctly. But anyway, she is militant. She's a graduate of Cardozo and is militant about not sending her child there. I also want to point out that the kids are out of school today. You know, this is, I mean, I'm as lucky as can be in terms of the work I do, and this is really difficult to get this time to talk to y'all. This is really important to me. I tried to mention it at the end of my testimony. I've yet to have a conversation with a parent when we get into it. We kind of chop it up about what the experience is in our neighborhood and Seton and how the neighborhood's changing. I've yet to have a conversation with a parent who says something other than, what are we going to do about sixth grade? And if we can't keep Suki's family here, forget it. There isn't a chance. You know what I mean? Like, we have to get this right. I am all in my neighborhood, and this is the biggest problem that I'm facing. And it was a promise, right? It's not like something that we're kind of angling for.
Right.
Anyway, and then the last thing, just really quickly, and this is, I apologize for being so blunt about this, but race is so huge here, right? And we're not talking about a dog park, and we're not talking about a bike track. This is a school. Everybody is going to benefit. This is going to transform our kids' lives. And anything that that DCPS can do, anything that you council members can do to follow up on what Suki is talking about, to make the room warmer for people that have a different language, for people who can't make it during the middle of the day. It behooves, if I may say, it behooves you to help to make that happen. We have to meet these people. It isn't just Whitey. It's everybody that needs this. So I don't mean no disrespect about this, and I shouldn't be flip, but this is a big deal.
I asked the question.
And one point I'd like to just make about this.
Oh, no, you gotta let, Sandra keeps trying to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just want to jump in because I have to hop. I have a meeting, but I think, I also want to point out that today is, our kids out of school. I am also lucky, as Mark said, where I have a pretty flexible job, but I even had to get, so I could be here today. I had to, find a day camp for my son to join, but I know a lot of parents are struggling with childcare. And even if it were a day where my kid were in school, it'd be hard to make this time, as a full-time working parent. And I think when you think about communities of color, you have to think about, a lot of these, families are in hourly or low wage or, low income family households where, they don't have access to an internet to sign on to a Zoom call like this, or, or to even know that this is happening. Honestly, I wouldn't even know that this were happening if it weren't for Anne Louise on the call. And I feel like I'm a pretty involved parent. So I think, access is a huge issue here. And then the piece, just to kind of address the piece on, if parents are going to actually send their kids to schools, I think absolutely yes, that's what we're fighting for. But I also think you have the issue of you have to give us the option, and we have to have a school where we will, send our kids to school. And I think charter schools are kind of a problem there, where, people of color are being sold on this promise of, if you send your kid to this charter school, they're going to get a better education than they would, if they were to go to a DCPS school. So I think that is also a piece here where, I think we just, and I think my take on charter schools is, if you see the population of them, there are a lot of Black and brown kids there. And so I think a lot of parents are also choosing to send their kids to charter schools because we don't have the option of, or they don't see an option. And you are not, I guess, not that you're not addressing it, but that you are not, how do I want to say this? Putting the word out there that this is an issue that you want to, that is a top priority. And so they're going another direction. And I think that we have to have this school so we can avoid that. So I didn't really say that as eloquently as I wanted to, but hopefully that all
No, I
makes
got
sense.
you. No, I mean, your point is out there. Like, even if we get them there to move forward today, the school isn't going to be built tomorrow, right? So parents have to make choices. By the way, most of I think that I have a 18-month-old and a 4-year-old. So I've done the lottery and living this. And middle school is a huge factor when you make your choice about elementary school, right? You're thinking about this even in that first lottery, right? And parents have to make choices that are best for their kids, even if you've been in the neighborhood 25 years and you're really committed to it, right? So I feel that. I only have 30 seconds left, so I guess Kathy and David, you'll have to flip for it.
Oh, no, I just wanted to give David, I don't need it. Go for it, David.
Thanks, Kathy. No, I agree. I definitely thank you for speaking up when you did. I just quickly wanted to say to this question, also to all this point, if the mayor thinks that this plan being proposed by the parents that are speaking today is not the right plan, then I'd like the mayor to propose a different plan. If the mayor thinks that that people speaking a certain language or of a certain racial group have not been sufficiently consulted, the city has, a lot of people whose job it can be to do community engagement, right? And they have more resources than this group of parents has to do translations and to do outreach and to do surveys. I think this status quo is not good. And I have not heard anyone suggest a different plan that, is more persuasive, but I'm open to that, right? And there are some people that rate, there's some pros and cons of this plan. Let's get it. Let's have the mayor come up with something to do. Probably this plan or something else.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I recognize Councilmember Pinto, Sarah Warren joined us. Why don't we hear from her, and then Councilmember Pinto will have a larger group of witnesses she can ask questions. Ms. Warren?
I appreciate your flexibility today. I had a work commitment, I had to bail for a minute, but I'm so pleased that you're giving me this opportunity to speak with you. So my name is Sarah Warren, and I'm the parent of 2 children at Seton Elementary School. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective on the opening of a city center middle school. My husband and I have been residents in Seton's boundary since 2009. Our oldest child is currently in 2nd grade, but he started at Seton in PK3 in 2017. Our youngest is in his 2nd year at Seton in PK4. We love our neighborhood and our school, and we remain hopeful that the city will stand by the residents in our neighborhood as they consider decisions about the future of the overall system. As we prepared to enter the lottery in 2017, we had no real knowledge about any of the options within a 15 to 20-minute walk of our home. As we attended open houses, we didn't know what questions to ask or what criteria to use to determine if a particular school might meet our son's needs. But when we entered Seton, it sort of just became apparent that this is where we needed to be. The interior is bright, the staff is amazing. All materials are communicated in English, Mandarin, and Spanish. The unique nature of Seton became even more apparent to us when we knew we needed to have our youngest assessed for developmental delays. Seton has a special education staff that is beyond compare. We are thankful every day for what they have done for our little guy. I was so fortunate that my job has afforded me the opportunity to participate in many of the field trips Seton organized for our oldest prior to the pandemic. I got to know so many of my oldest son's school friends, kids he still sees and values every day. These kids are incredible. They're so loving and supportive of each other. The PTO is extremely engaged with committees focused on planning events, supporting the teachers and staff, and supporting the school community through efforts to address food insecurity. Returning after the pandemic this school year, it was clear how much we had taken our community for granted. Every day on the walk to and from school, we run into our Seton family, and I had no idea how much I missed it until I had the opportunity to do it again. So why am I telling you any of this? Because after more than 5 years of effort, frankly, I'm afraid of losing my community. As we enter the final stretch of 2nd grade, I talk to my fellow parents, and we're all trying to figure out the next move. No one is optimistic the city will meet the needs of our community, which is diverse and vibrant and desperately wants to hold on to hope. We are fortunate to know families in other elementary schools, including Garrison, that feed into the Cardozo feeder pattern. And we had the same conversations with them over and over again. What have you heard about McKinley and Brookland? Is there a charter school you would even consider? Did you hear that Michael's family is moving to Maryland? These are conversations that I hate to hear. I grew up in public schools. I value my son's public schools. I'm committed to public schools. The time for equivocation is over. Families are committed to staying in the city, but the city must honor its commitment to quality public education for all its residents. We have the space and we have the community support. Please support the school communities looking for a middle school option. Please support a city center middle school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all so much for being here today and sharing your testimony. That was very moving and really important to hear, not only from your perspective, but appreciate the conversation around what you're hearing from other parents, and this kind of continued concern that is so front of mind for so many families. Some of this will be a little bit anecdotal, but I'm curious if those of you who are either at a feeder school or speaking to families can speak about which middle schools which middle schools families are currently sending their kids to in lieu of Cardozo.
I can speak to that a little bit. I know back during the engagement process before the new Banneker was built, I found some data. I was unable to find it today. And at that point, which was, I think, the 2018-2019 school year, the single largest recipient of sixth graders from Seton was Hardy Elementary. That's less of an option now because they are much more crowded. I know families going to Brookland and Langley next year. Obviously, we also have families that are moving out of the district entirely, as you heard.
Also, McKinley and Basis.
Yeah, sorry, McKinley, not Langley. Langley's the elementary school
Yeah.
over there. Yeah, McKinley, Basis as well. Yeah.
I've heard also Brookland. People are looking at Brookland.
Anything else to add there? David, anyone else?
I think Suki would have the best window into this, but she had to step off the call.
Okay, no problem. So to the argument that we've been hearing from the mayor and the deputy mayor for education about there not being sufficient demand for a standalone Center City Middle School, how best do you respond to that? How do you think that we should be moving forward this argument based on data to help us make the case that there is a real need and a current demand and a demand that will continue to build over time?
Do you think, why can't you use Ward 4 as an example?
Yeah.
I think we didn't even have the level of dedication that these parents have. We had a vision and we had to kind of sell our vision. But I don't understand why they don't take that as some kind of a proof that, if you build it, they do come, especially given the demand in all the surrounding area. I mean, how do they respond to our success in Ward 4 as not being some kind of a reason to give this a try? I guess and we don't actually have at the secondary level, to Brianne's point, we don't have a lot of white parents at our secondary schools. In fact, a lot of the parents that didn't show up to argue are there and happy. And we are starting to get more of a group that's coming into McFarland and Ida B. Wells. But I would say it takes time and it takes the faith that this is a right that these parents have, and we're dedicated to providing it. I mean, what's impressed me about these parents is they're committed to their DC public schools. They're just not shopping. They're saying, I want to invest in the public schools that are democratically run. So I don't want to take up more time than that.
Thank you. That's a great point. Anything else on making the case that the demand is there?
So this is Mary Filardo, and looking at the data, there are about 16,000 6th through 8th graders in the district in the public schools, about half in the charters and half in DCPS. And again, I think it's what I was saying before to Councilmember Mendelson is that, so half of the kids are opting out of middle school in DCPS. And I think part of what you're hearing from these elementary DCPS parents is that we actually want to go to DCPS middle schools, but DCPS is not giving us the options. So while there are 49 essentially middle grade schools in the charters, DCPS is kind of saying somehow that there's no demand, and I don't understand why when they keep hearing that parents would like to go to their neighborhood middle schools, that they're not prepared to actually provide them. And it's really a fundamental flaw in the way people are thinking about what families want and what their demand is. They're not responding to the demand. And so, people are going elsewhere. And I know they've got, the experience when they did this work at Jefferson Middle School, and they said, oh, the Brent parents said they would go there, and then they didn't. But they modernized Jefferson. Jefferson is growing in enrollment. I mean, they're not really listening to the families. And, some of us would argue that this is a function of not having an education policy board. Here we're talking to the council about what are fundamentally education policy and planning decisions that should have been taken care of within the education policy world, but because it's just the mayor, we really haven't had an avenue.
Yeah, I would say if you're just looking at numbers and nothing else, there are only 3 elementary schools now, well, 2.5 that feed directly into the Cardozo Middle program. Because half of the kids from Cleveland also have rights into McFarland in the Spanish Track. And before they had closed the middle school, there were 5 schools that fed into Shaw Junior High. So DCPS's own planning has really just chopped up our entire feeder pattern in order to ensure that there are fewer and fewer kids going to the middle school. Trying to make it small enough that, I don't know, one day there will be no kids left or something, which is just not the way you should serve families in a feeder pattern. It provides no stability. But luckily we do, I guess, one benefit of choice is if there is a better middle school option, more families would choose it, whether they are in the 3 current feeders or not.
Well, also people come back from those small charters to a large, vibrant middle school. That's part of what's happened. I mean, I don't have the data, but people want a strong middle school experience. So why aren't we even looking at the children that are in the charters that might choose to come to their neighborhood school where they don't have the lottery in? I would also add that to the argument.
And to Kathy's point, there are several charter middle schools specifically in the center city that would have those children would have very easy access.
Thank you so much. Okay. And Ms. Florida, David Albert was talking a little bit about the capacity at Francis Stevens. Can you talk about whether overcrowding was alleviated in Ward 3 after renovations? Because there's been some discussion about once renovations will happen at Francis Stevens, there won't be as much overcrowding, but I'm hesitant to think that will be changed. Can you speak about the Ward 3 experience?
Well, of course, in Ward 3, they not only modernized, they expanded every one of the elementary schools. So they were some of the smallest elementary schools in the city. They expanded them. And of course, when the size of the elementaries expand, the feeding, the cohort that's going into the middle schools is much larger. And then, Deal was modernized for 800. It's been modernized multiple times and added onto to get to 1400 and still got temporary classes on it. And, Stoddard, Key, Hyde, Addison, they've all expanded. And so, of course, Hardy, they feed into Hardy. So, of course, this is what's crowding Hardy, right? With Francis Stevens, you've got a lot of the pressure, frankly, I think, David, is on the upper grades. And the middle school has been taking more kids in. And so it is positioned to be more crowded. But because the elementary it's not like a big feeder with Francis Stevens Elementary into the middle school. It's really Thompson and Ross and Out of Boundary that is pushing the middle grades. And, I think as David mentioned, there are ways to think about that. It's an interesting problem because, of course, it was a junior high school. So it has some features that make it a good location for a K-8, but the district has been moving away from K-8s all across the city, in part because the middle grades aren't big enough to provide all of the kinds of quality of programming and diversity of programming that kind of support really high quality middle schools.
Yeah, regarding Francis Stevens, I just want to make sure, Councilmember Pinto, I think what you were saying was matching what I said, but my guess would be that when they modernize, it will become more crowded because some people that didn't want to go may start to. So I think that was what you were thinking. I was saying, yes, there at the moment, a few, but not very many students from Ross go to Francis Stevens. More move or go to something like Basis or Latin or private schools currently. And there's a lot of appetite for that improving. And to all the points that Mary was just making, I think this gets to, I know I've said this a bunch of times and I know you all agree, the lack of a broader plan here. We're making these decisions in a very tactical one-off way. Should Francis Stevens still be K-8? I mean, I don't, there's people that have suggested maybe not. Certainly the Francis Stevens community, which is not here, should be a part of that conversation. But that conversation with them has not been happening. And so they haven't had an opportunity to be a part of a discussion about, okay, what are all the things we want to do? There are people at Ross that feel that the lack of a world language, for example, at Francis Stevens is an obstacle to going there. If it were larger, it would have the resources to do that or combine with another school. On the other hand, there are people that like, maybe it being smaller, like it being on the same campus and so forth. So we need to have all of these people being talking to each other and talking with officials in a serious discussion about what we can do in this area, because there are a lot of good options that sort of don't get considered because they're sort of too long-term and we're just thinking short-term. And I think that's a problem.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. I'll just say to this group in closing that I think it's also really important to think about how keeping this cohort together and establishing a new standalone middle school is going to best prepare our students for high school and beyond as well. So thank you all for your advocacy and being here today. And I know my colleagues and I will continue to fight for this. Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. So that's going to conclude our questioning for you all, but I want to echo the thanks to each of the witnesses for you taking your time to be here, but also just your commitment to public education, public schools. So you all are excused. I'm going to call the Deputy Mayor and again, thank you for your testimony. So the next witness is Paul Kine, who's the Deputy Mayor for Education. Good morning, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Good morning, Chairman.
How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
When you're ready.
Good morning again, Chairman Mendelson, members of the Committee of the Whole, staff, and members of the public. My name is Paul Kine, and I'm honored to serve as the Deputy Mayor for Education for the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's roundtable on the status of a DCPS middle school in Center City. Public school planning is one of the core functions of the DME, my office. It is our role to ensure that decisions taken around public school openings, expansions, replications, and closures are in the very best interests of our residents and our city. We take this work extremely seriously. Our public school planning framework is composed of three main elements: school quality, facility capacity, and programmatic demand. By understanding the opportunities and gaps within neighborhoods and within a citywide context, we believe we can effectively target solutions to address them and meet the needs of students and families across Washington, D.C. Importantly, we do not believe such consequential decisions can be taken in isolation or without regard to the expertise and input of communities. One pillar of the DME's role is therefore to engage with the community around any and all high-stakes public school decisions. And I'll set the record straight here on this point based on the recent testimony. We do conduct this deep community engagement with translations and in other languages. We also believe that collaboration and coordination are vital to a well-functioning system. Using our framework and the corollary analyses, our role is to develop a shared understanding of the current and future needs for public schools with DCPS, the Public Charter School Board, individual charter LEAs, which are local education agencies, and the community more broadly. We strive to develop informed, coordinated, data-driven recommendations to present to the mayor that balance neighborhood and citywide needs. Understanding and balancing needs requires much fact-finding and robust analyses. Our planning and analysis work is designed to provide key facts and also to increase transparency for the public and equip leaders with strong analytic tools to drive decision-making. DME makes publicly available key education data and trends in DC through multiple avenues, including our EdSite and Edscape analyses, facility plan reports and supplements. To date, DME has released 22 EdSites, providing easy to understand information on some of our education system's most pressing issues, including enrollment trends, school facilities, and COVID-19 testing. Edscapes provide a set of interactive visualizations and downloadable data sets on facilities, school quality, and student demand to inform and support program and school planning. These publications are all available on the DME website. We are also excited about our plans to release local area needs analyses that more specifically target the opportunities and gaps in specific neighborhoods. Furthermore, we work collaboratively with the council to provide high quality data and research to support improvement in our public schools. Our work to develop the common financial reporting standards and our support for the Research Practice Partnership are examples of our efforts to support data-driven, actionable, and citywide solutions. We look forward to our ongoing partnership on future planning initiatives. In decisions about the school landscape specifically, including new schools, campus and program expansions, and school relocations, we look at a number of factors, including population and birth trends, feeder enrollment, so-called capture rates, school quality, school programming, capacity, utilization, housing development impacts, and the systemic consequences of the decisions. We consistently review data and trends and adapt based on changing conditions, and we revisit our decisions as new information emerges and based on community engagement and input. Today's roundtable on a potential Center City Middle School offers a good example. When I first started at the DME in 2018, the DME and DCPS analyzed enrollment data and trends and feeder patterns and conducted a substantial community engagement process to determine the feasibility of a standalone middle school to serve Center City neighborhoods, including Logan Circle and Shaw. We held over 15 school and community meetings and 6 citywide meetings involving hundreds of community members and families. And we collected survey feedback from around 250 respondents. And here again, I'll correct the record to say we engaged every single elementary school feeder that's under discussion today. At that time, DME and DCPS determined there was not enough evidence to support the need for a new standalone middle school. However, there was some justification to support a relocation of the Cardozo middle grades program to a standalone site. We ended up concluding that, concerned as we were about future enrollment and overall middle school utilization, we could not justify a moving at that time, but that we could revisit the analysis and community feedback on an ongoing basis. More recently, DCPS also conducted a feasibility study driven by $1 million allocated by the council in fiscal year 2020, which explored the viability of Old Banneker and Garnet Patterson to serve as the site for a middle school. This study was conducted to help understand the opportunities and challenges present at each site and to inform future planning. The education landscape in the district is dynamic. Over the past few years, middle school enrollment has increased across our DCPS and public charter schools. The citywide elementary school enrollment swell that was growing before the pandemic has moved into the middle school grades. This is good news. Even so, in school year 2018-19, the center city area of the city continues to be home to a relatively modest number of children. We appreciate hearing from the public witnesses about their thoughts on how to strengthen the feeder pattern and appreciate the perspective that relocating the Cardozo middle grade schools would be beneficial. And I am personally very heartened and love hearing from parents in particular about their wonderful experiences at their DCPS neighborhood schools. In conclusion, we do believe in strong, vibrant neighborhood schools, supplemented by citywide schools, offered by both public charter schools and DCPS. And we take any decision around moving the Cardozo middle grades and establishing a standalone middle school very, very seriously. We believe changes in our public school infrastructure must be rooted in community needs and clear criteria, including space, capacity, programming, quality, and equity. We appreciate the community and the council's engagement on this issue. We are happy to continue engaging in the conversation we started a few years ago, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kynes. So there'll be at least one 10-minute round for each of us to ask questions. Your testimony seems to throw, I'm saying this with some hesitation, cold water on the advocates for a new middle school. Maybe not quite cold, but certainly not room temperature. How much of this is because the budget is coming out next week and you don't want to say too much? You know, the mayor's going to propose the capital budget. We put $3 million in for the middle school. In the past, we put money in, the mayor took it out. The mayor could take it out, she could leave it in, she could add to it. How much of your testimony is, how do I put this, nuance to reflect that the budget hasn't been released?
Well, thank you, Chairman, for implying that I might be capable of submitting a nuanced testimony. But I will share with you that yes, as we've talked about previously, the timing of this roundtable is such that next week, when our capital budget, the mayor's capital budget is produced, you will actually see a full sense of our planning across the entire city. And we're having this hearing this week. I think what I would say in terms of my testimony is I'm trying to simply provide the idea that there's a very, very balanced and sophisticated approach to this kind of decision-making that we undertake. We're very, very proud of our planning process. And there's a lot to discuss here, and it is very complicated. And I appreciate very much the testimony from the community members. I deeply enjoyed and appreciated the deep engagement we did in 18-19 before the pandemic on this topic. And I'm happy to respond to elucidate some of both the facts and the perspectives I think that are available. But we're not at a point here where I can actually talk about what any potential planning might be in the capital budget as we finalize that.
So you just characterized the work as balanced and sophisticated process of decision-making. But Kathy Riley's testimony about Ward 4 suggests it wasn't that at all. Now, that's not you, and that's also a number of years ago. But the thrust of her testimony was that all the arguments, the balance was against trying to resurrect McFarland as a middle school, or Roosevelt as a high school, or Coolidge as a high school, or maybe both of them. I think that was the point. And she says, build it and they come. So how come we don't do balanced and sophisticated in Ward 4, but we're doing balanced and sophisticated here?
Chairman, I cannot comment on a process that would have occurred before my tenure. What I can share is that in the instance of the Shaw Middle School, this is something that I've directly overseen and helped support recommendations on. It has been, to my mind, extremely balanced, and we've tried to account for all the variations of complexity. So on this idea of if you build it, they will come, I mean, there are some important considerations here that I think we all have to account for. So for example, as one example, and this is not an argument for or against the school, but it's simply a matter of the record. How many middle school age children live within the potential 5 elementary school feeder patterns that would go to a middle school, a new standalone middle school? How many public school age children live in those feeder patterns? The answer to that currently is 492. That is, by all accounts, a modest number of middle school students, because one cannot assume that 100% are going to go to the school. Secondly, if you look across all of DCPS's middle schools, all of them, what's the current utilization rate? This goes to the point that was made about how DCPS doesn't understand that people come to their middle schools. The current utilization rate is 61% on average. 61%. So again, that doesn't make the argument for or against a standalone middle school, but these are the kinds of considerations we have to take into account. Thirdly, our middle school enrollment across all public schools has indeed been growing, apart from a slight decline this past year. But over the past 2 years, our elementary school, public school enrollment has been declining. And we've seen a vastly slowed, or maybe not vastly, but a partially slowed population growth and a decline in births. So in other words, the thing we're trying to prevent is the idea that we will establish and create and build a new school that would potentially have too low enrollment to sustain any kind of quality programming and at which families would be unhappy. And so that's the determination we came to a few years ago. We're currently continuing to revisit that. We'll have a new determination to share publicly next week. And we look forward to doing that. But that's the kind of balanced approach I think we have got to take to these questions.
But the data that you just threw out, and is that from the 2019 analysis or the 2020 analysis?
This is current.
So from neither of the analyses, there was an analysis you did in 2018-19 and an analysis you did in 2020. And what you just articulated was separate from either of those.
That's right. I'm actually basically looking at the 2021 enrollment data that we have. So that's current analysis.
Okay, enrollment data. So it wasn't the number of students, middle school students in the catchment area, but the number of middle-aged students in the feeder schools.
So let me try and be clearer. I shared in the first instance the number of middle school aged children who live within the boundaries of the elementary school feeders. In other words, if you had a standalone middle school, what would the boundary be? And we've looked at assuming the 5 elementary schools that we've talked about. And if you look at the boundary area of what the standalone middle school would be, then we know that there are 492 middle school age students that live within that boundary for the middle school that currently attend public school. That doesn't account for students that might be in private school. But we think that that number may be, if it's consistent with the citywide average, that might add an additional 20 or 30 students to that number. So you're talking about 500 students. Again, it doesn't make the case for or against this
No, I
school.
get that, but I'm having problems with that data, and maybe you could share that with the committee. Would you do that? I'm having some problems with that data. We have 3 feeder schools, and the 3 feeder schools have hundreds of students. A middle school would be 3 grades, 6, 7, 8. And I think you said your data came from 5 elementary schools. Again, there are hundreds of kids in these schools and only 492. That's like 100 in each grade. Well, 150 in each grade. That just, I mean, Mary Filardo, I think, spoke of thousands of students in the catchment area. I'm looking at her testimony, but it's not in there. And that also, I'm not sure how to reconcile that with the testimony, which I credit, that the enrollment at these feeder schools is like a pyramid. Much bigger in the lowest grades and much smaller in the upper grades. this, which means there are a lot of kids who are leaving these schools. But you're saying only 492. Am I just missing something here?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably, Chairman, you might be. First of all, we're very happy to share the data with your office, so we'll be glad to do
Please,
that.
okay.
And you're right, there are currently in the feeder schools, there are over 1,000 kids enrolled in the feeder elementary schools. That's absolutely true.
Over 1,003 or 5?
This is who live in the Cardozo feeder pattern.
Okay.
So I'll have to confirm whether that's 4 or 5. In all instances, we include Ross because Ross has a dual right currently to Cardozo. It doesn't feed directly into Francis Stevens. And then we've also typically included Thompson as one of the schools that was part of the original recommendation. So that's why I talk about 5. So you've got Cleveland, Garrison, and Seton, and then Ross, which all 4 of those currently feed into Cardozo. Ross with dual rights to Cardozo and Francis Stevens, and then Thompson, which currently feeds into Francis Stevens.
Well, you have to agree that the testimony in the feeder, and you have to agree that the enrollment in the feeder elementary schools is much larger than the enrollment in the middle school at Cardozo. So how do we deal with that? That's a slightly different approach to this issue.
Yes, and Chairman, thanks for the question. I think it's another important consideration. So a couple of important points there as well. So in terms of what we call in-boundary enrollment, so this is the number of school-age children who enroll in their DCPS neighborhood school. In the Cardozo feeder schools currently, that number is 35%. So 35% of the elementary school age children who live in the boundaries attend their DCPS neighborhood school at the elementary grades. And that number, as Councilmember Pinto, you were alluding to earlier, you said directly, that number shrinks to 12% by the time you get to Cardozo.
I'm out of time. Let me turn to my colleagues. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thanks, Chairman. Hello, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for your testimony. So can you explain to me the difference between a standalone middle school and a standalone site?
Well, I don't understand the question. Did I say standalone site or standalone?
So just
I would use those interchangeably.
Okay, in your testimony, you said there's no evidence to support the need for a new middle school. There was some justification to support a relocation of the middle grades to a standalone site.
Yes, sorry, I don't mean to be confusing about that. I'm simply sharing the fact that we want to acknowledge that the idea of creating a new, a whole cloth, a new middle school and not making any changes to Cardozo feels really unfeasible. And so what we're really talking about is the idea that you would move the middle grades from Cardozo to its own standalone middle school.
This
In
seems
other words,
like a distinction without a difference.
Well, you may think that, Councilmember, but I think it's important that we're very clear. We don't mean that we would keep the 6 through 12 education campus intact at Cardozo and create a new middle school in Shaw. I don't know if that, is that what you're recommending?
No. So, okay, just bear with me. I've been here a while, not just on the council. Back when Shaw Middle School was closed, the children went to Garnet Patterson in Ward 1, and they were there until their principal died. And then when that happened to coincide with when Cardozo reopened. And so the children started going to Cardozo. And I think for a little while it was called Shaw at Cardozo, right? But it's the same community. No, it's not that we would have both. It's that the schools that feed into Cardozo now would feed into Shaw, then Cardozo, right? I thought that was what we were talking about.
Yes, that's the distinction that I'm trying to make.
Okay, so we agree, fine. I just was a little confused by the way it was discussed, and I appreciate the clarification. Okay, so, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you talked a bit about the enrollment numbers and the justification of that, but we all have to acknowledge that parents are making decisions about middle school in elementary school, right? So I'd be curious to know the numbers pre-K versus third and fourth grade when parents are starting to say, I'm going to get in the lottery here because I don't want to send my baby to a big high school, right? I think that matters. But I mean, also parents are making decisions at pre-K if they have a better option. If they see a feeder pattern from that point forward and they can get into that right now, they're going to do it. So I think we need to acknowledge that things would change if we had a standalone middle school and that the school's feeding went there instead of straight to the high school building.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Parents make choices throughout, all along the feeder pattern. And that's why you would never hear me saying, let's look at a number and make a case. And what you're not hearing me say today at all is that this is a definitive case one way or another. I'm simply trying to ensure that we've got a balanced assessment as decision makers of all of the circumstance to ensure that if we do make a move in this direction, we believe it's going to be successful. And I hear Kathy Riley say, if you build it, they will come. But we also know that Shaw Middle School was closed in 2008 for low enrollment. And we want to ensure that we don't have a repeat of that cycle as population trends shift and change. The neighborhood has changed. There are more people there. As I shared, we've been very excited about the increase in middle school enrollment across the city. We still know that there's underutilization at a number of our schools. We've been investing heavily in the Cardozo middle school grades and Cardozo school itself to drive an improvement journey there under Principal Molo, who I believe you referenced earlier, and we're very excited about. So we are on a path, we believe. And the question which we promised to revisit, and we are revisiting, and you have been very consistent about, is do we need the path to now include a standalone middle school in this neighborhood? And that's why we're excited to have the ongoing conversation. But I'm simply trying to offer some information that allows us to have a balanced perspective.
I understand. Thank you. Do you happen to know what the enrollment numbers were at Shaw when it was closed as compared to what the projections are for now?
I actually don't, but I suspect that is findable. So I'll be glad to commit to finding out what I can about that. You mean from 2007, 2006?
Yeah, from back then.
We can look to see what we have there, definitely.
I think when they were at Garnett Patterson, it was around 50 kids. But I could be wrong about that. And then I guess I'm excited to hear that we're doing better with middle school enrollment. Do you see a difference between standalone middle schools and middle schools that are part of education campuses in terms of parents in the feeder pattern enrolling their kids?
We have, I believe, 3 schools that are 612s. That includes, for example, Czech and one that I'm blanking on. And I'm not sure that we see a difference there, because if you've got, for example, Czech has a very specialized set of programming that families will be, really excited and interested in. So that may actually mean that it's more of an outlier programmatically than some of the other standalone middle schools. So it's hard to know, but that's knowable. My team will know that. I'll be happy to.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm getting at is we've just heard really consistently from parents that they're not jazzed about the co-location model and having their babies go from elementary school essentially to a high school building. And that's one of the things driving this conversation.
Yes, we heard that very clearly back in 1819, and it's certainly an important consideration.
Okay. In all the study that we've done, what are you hearing from parents about why they're not enrolling their kids in the Cardozo feeder pattern?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, essentially what we're hearing primarily is the point you just made, families that are not sending their children to Cardozo. They are not sending their children in part because they don't like the 612 model. And as was raised earlier, when parents look at the outcomes from Cardozo, some families shared with us that they weren't satisfied with what they saw as the educational outcomes. I should share with you that we did engage with families who do choose to send their kids to Cardozo. This was before the pandemic, and there was actually quite a lot of enthusiasm about the school and the culture, and certainly with the new principal, the work on culture and climate has been lauded as something that families were comfortable about. So there are certainly families, 200 families, 200 students who attend this school that actually feel pretty good about it. So I think there's a lot to be said for the improvement journey that they're on.
Yeah.
Your question was about those families that are choosing not to send their students there. And those are some of the things that we heard, consistent with some of the testimony today.
And I certainly want to acknowledge, you know, Principal Mola is a tremendous leader and has really done an incredible job at Cardozo. And I'm thrilled that there are 200 families that are sending their kids there. I just think most of them are not part of the feeder pattern from what I understand, although I could be wrong about that. I don't think there are very many Ward 1 families in particular. And I should acknowledge that Ward 1 is a very small slice of the feeder pattern, ironically, given that Cardozo is kind of in the heart of Ward 1. But that, you know, whenever a school is in my ward, I'm going to want to work to serve those families who are there, regardless of where they live. Well, I think we're getting at the right questions here, right? And, you know, if we were to build a new standalone middle school, which of course, you know, I strongly advocate for, there's time to still support the families that are happy there at Cardozo, you know, because it takes a little while to build a building and middle school is only 3 years, right? So it doesn't have to be a rude awakening for anybody. But certainly, you know, the other piece of this is physical space. When the school was renovated, it didn't nobody envisioned it having a 9th grade academy and the international academy and the middle school population in it. And we want all of those schools, all of those unique academic experiences to thrive and grow, and they're not going to all fit in that building forever.
Yeah, so I would share, just in response to that, council member, a very important consideration about what's our vision for the Cardozo High School itself. And certainly as it considers its own future and as it works with its community and its families that attend there, middle school families that are interested in going to that school. Yes, those are very important questions that will need to be asked, and DCPS is involved deeply in discussions with them again and again. I really enjoyed listening to all of the testimony earlier, and I take it all very seriously. I did take issue with the picture that was being painted of a DCPS or a DOME that was not deeply engaged with families and that was not actually providing translations. I mean, we had Spanish translations, we had Amharic translations. We've done
I recall that
in Spanish, so I just wanted to be sure that the record is clear.
I agree that particular process was inclusive in many ways. I think we can do better with our language access here at the council too, right? Just as my time is up, but I just have one last question, which is when is there going to be a decision about this moving forward?
As I shared earlier, council member, and as I have talked to the chairman about, as he acknowledged, when this hearing was scheduled, it's a week before the mayor is submitting her budget, including her capital budget.
What? There's a budget next week?
At that time, we will be in a strong position to share what our current visioning and planning is around this issue, one way or another, and to share the rationale and reason for it, and to continue our discussions with you, Councilmember Pinto, the chairman, and with members of the community.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Councilmember Pinto.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Chairman. Hi, Deputy Mayor Kine. Nice to see you.
You too, council member.
So you talked a little bit about the efforts that you all engaged with in 2018 when you first joined as deputy mayor. And I guess I just want to better understand kind of that process and how things have changed over the course of the last 4 years. And if you think you all are willing to relook at the numbers, and not just the numbers of what the demand is for current students who are at Cardozo, but the effects, as we talked a little bit about with some of the public witnesses today, on the other schools, on the other middle schools where families are either entering the lottery to send their children to or are moving closer to, and how those numbers can inform our ultimate understanding of what the demand is.
Absolutely, council member. And we committed to doing that then on an ongoing basis. We certainly have done it almost every year, certainly this year, as we have found ourselves moving through the pandemic with more time and attention and actually more information and insight about what's happening with our public school enrollment. But we would never, ever base a recommendation or decision about what to do about schools based on either a single year's data or, for example, in this instance, with an assumption about how families are currently making decisions based on the current configuration. So, I mean, for example, something else that we know is that of the fifth graders who graduated from the elementary school feeders in 2021, so last school year, we know where all of them have gone. So there were 126 fifth graders that graduated from the feeders last year. 15 left the system. 21 enrolled at Francis Stevens or McFarland. 36 enrolled at other DCPS schools. 38 enrolled at charter schools, and 16 enrolled in Cardozo. Now, I say all that not to throw lots of numbers around, but rather to say that is a snapshot of current decision-making by families who are attending elementary schools in this feeder pattern. That's where their fifth graders ended up going to sixth grade. And again, of the 126, you had 21 going to Francis Stevens and McFarland, 36 going to other DCPS schools, and then 38 going to charter schools, with 16 ending up at Cardozo. We don't ever imagine that the conversation we're having is about the 16. The conversation we believe we're having is about the 126 in the future. As we listen to families and understand, again, as we learned more today and got more insight about how families are making decisions, that's vital to this kind of consideration. I hope that's responsive to your question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's definitely good to hear. And, you know, is a response to some of our discussion this morning about not just having this discussion be myopically focused on this one school, but thinking about the effects of the whole city. So thank you for sharing that.
And Councilmember, I would just, I don't want to cut you off, but I would also share there was discussion the chairman was having around Hardy and Deal and Francis Stevens middle grades. Mm-hmm. One important note about Hardy, and again, this is not to make a case one way or another, but Hardy's current utilization is 64% because the Fillmore Arts Center, which occupied a floor, has been taken out. So there is more room in Hardy. So again, I don't want to leave the impression in this conversation that Hardy is somehow at capacity with no room for students. So that's an important part of the discussion also.
Well, I'm concerned to hear that because in speaking to Hardy families, I hear every day about the overcrowding that's happening at Hardy and Fillmore, and the concern that families have for lack of space. So if those numbers are indicating that Hardy's only at 64% capacity, that is misaligned with the experience that many of our families are having and feeling.
Well, we'd love to follow up with you about that and just ensure that this is all accurate.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of looking at the demand numbers, and I appreciate you elaborating a little bit on what went into that. What numbers would need to be hit to persuade you that the demand is there for a standalone middle school in City Center?
The number that we used as a ballpark number in 1819 was 550. And at that time, it was based on DCPS's school budgeting model, which would allow us, a middle school of 550 students, to basically have access to all kinds of programming that smaller schools don't necessarily get access to. Now, I personally don't think you have to hit 550. We see very successful middle schools at lower numbers than that. But I would say the numbers where we were during that process in the kind of 200 plus student range did not give us strong confidence that we would have a really robust middle school with terrific programming that would satisfy the families. So I think that you could say somewhere between there, I think would give us confidence that we would have a good, solid, strong programming available based on budget.
Okay, and what are your current demand estimates?
So we have ranges that range depending on what you assume about these students and families and their decision making. And they range from, you've got 12% in boundary participation rate up to what we see at some of the schools in the 70% participation rates. So that would get you, and then of course, assuming that you have some out of boundary, you have to make assumptions about out of boundary participation as well. Students coming from other parts of the city. So I believe our current estimates range from 250 up to 500.
All right, so
Give
up to 500 is pretty close.
Give or take, depending on your assumptions. Absolutely, and we're developing a stronger sense about where we think we would most likely land. And of course, conversations like today's, where you've got many families asserting strongly that there are members of cohorts that would like to continue on, support landing in one place versus another.
Okay. Because the range up to 500, and then you said the 550 is within range. It sounds like even per the zone estimates, we're pretty close to what could get us there. The other thing I'll just add/ask about in terms of projecting demand is we are really focused on bringing more residents to downtown DC. And I know that the mayor is aligned with this on the need to have more folks living downtown. And so as we think about the people and family and student patterns over the course of the next 10 years, is that something that enters into the formula of some of the other economic development, residential development, conversions, efforts that are going on downtown to bring more families there?
We do look at projections, and we are slightly hampered currently because, of course, we're waiting on the new census numbers to be put through Office of Planning. So we look at population projections, which include school age population projections. We also look at housing that we know is actually going to be built. That's actually different from, I think, the very good question, Councilmember, you're asking, which is, we actually see a vision, or we see a path to kind of transformative kind of housing patterns within the city, even for projects that haven't yet begun. And so that's difficult for us to take into account, apart from, I would say, in a qualitative way, which becomes part of the overall kind of decision making on this. But I think important to consider. But we do take account, if we know there's a housing development on the books, we do take that into account in the kind of planning discussions that we have.
Well, thank you so much. And just in our last minute this round, I want to ask you about the current status of co-location at Cardozo, because we've had hearings in the past where I've asked Chancellor Flaherty, do you think a co-location model is in a position to best serve students' needs? And the answer was no. And so in addition to all of the demand arguments, and how are we ensuring that the students who are going into this co-location model, that their needs are best met?
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. This is obviously a vital part of our conversation, because it's not as though we don't have students and families currently attending the by right middle school in this neighborhood, and that's the students and families that are attending Cardozo middle grades. And I can't comment on what the chancellor responded to you. I wasn't observing that at the time. I can share with you that my own view of 6 through 12 models is that they can, in some instances, work extremely well, though not in all instances. In the case of the Cardozo Middle School, we have done work to ensure that there's a separation with the middle grades and the high school grades. We have added additional administrators to the middle grades. As I shared, overall, the overall school itself received a top-notch principal who did tremendous work at Bancroft, as you know, and is on a path to doing similar work at Cardozo. DCPS has invested additional resources in both the high school and middle school at Cardozo. They have transitioned their system to the multi-tier system of supports, which is an individualized set of programming for students. They've done additional training for the middle grade staff there, and on and on. So we are investing and acting extensively to ensure a higher quality and a high quality of schooling in the middle grades. Should I speak or
Sorry,
Sandy?
I froze there. Chairman, I'm out of time this round.
I don't think it'll be another round. Do you, if you have a few more questions?
Oh, thank you so much.
And then
Okay.
I'll ask Councilmember Nadeau.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to ask then Deputy Mayor about, and thank you for sharing that about Cardozo and the kind of improvements there. Back to the kind of enrollment conversation. If we look at enrollment in first grade for all of the feeder schools and assumed that there was a by right standalone middle school, how many middle school students would we have?
If you assumed 100% of all first graders went?
Yes.
Yeah, that goes to the point I was making earlier, and I think potentially somewhat clumsily with the chairman. When we look at the number of middle school aged children who live within the Cardozo boundary pattern that attend public schools, that number is 492. So that would be across 6th, 7th, and 8th grades.
Okay.
So that's the maximum, because that's the number of kids that are actually living in the feeder pattern who are the right age to go to the school. So that number is going to be higher than your first grade, your very interesting first grade kind of scenario, because that literally is, you have about 500 students who are public school age who currently live within the boundary. So then you're only going to work your way down from there as some of those families clearly choose to attend other schools. Nowhere in the city do we have 100% of families sending their students to their neighborhood DCPS middle school.
Right. But is there anywhere in the city that is having as low as 12% sending them to their neighborhood middle school?
That is, I believe, the lowest or amongst the lowest capture rate of, let me see, this is for, of the DCPS middle schools, it's one of the lowest, yes.
Okay. And I think that's very telling. And completely agree that there are absolutely efforts that need to continue to make sure that the current feeder pattern in Cardozo is best set up to succeed. But as we plan, and as we heard from today, it seems like the need for a standalone middle school is really there. I think this can be my last question, but we've seen in Ward 3 that just about after every school modernization, the school is already over capacity in the first couple of years, and Francis Stevens is about to be modernized. Are there any plans to address the, I'll call it inevitable overcrowding that may happen at Francis Stevens post-modernization?
It's one of the things, council member, that we look at very carefully, which is what do we think the new building enrollment should be? What do we think is the right size for a school in order to give families, the really strong and wonderful set of programming, but also how can we ensure, as we look at the kinds of changes we're talking about here in neighborhoods and across the city, that we're addressing the needs holistically of families in neighborhoods and neighborhoods that are nearby. That's why the conversation, I think, about the middle school in Center City actually does involve conversations about Francis Stevens and Hardy and Deal, the charter schools and so on, because this is really all about families. And what we care about most is families feeling as though they have a strong option. And we want, in the first instance, for the strong option to be a strong neighborhood school. So in the case of the situation we're looking at here, we do have schools that feed into Francis Stevens. You've got Francis Stevens as a K-8. My understanding from having talked to families there on the administration is many families are very happy with that. So I think we have to be very careful about any conversation about disrupting that configuration. We'd want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those families, and the modernization, as it's currently planned, is for an elementary and middle grades program. So then, to your question about how do we ensure we're modernizing to the right number, that's both a question of building capacity, because it's not like you have unlimited space, but also what some of the very specific and dynamic needs are of the school community. What are the kinds of rooms for electives that need to be present in the building, and so on and so forth. So we certainly engage deeply with community, and I am sure with you and your office as we have those discussions up front, as we do all of the design work on the modernization and planning, and we'll be happy to continue those.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you, Chairman, for the extra time. Deputy Mayor, I hope it's fair to characterize this discussion today as gratitude to you for keeping an open mind as we still hear from families who need a standalone middle school. And I'm still so concerned by the many families we hear from often who tell us that they're either entering the lottery to go to a different school, moving out of the neighborhood, or worse, moving out of the city. And we really hope that that doesn't continue to happen in such special school communities that our elementary school feeders are, and really hope that we can keep those cohorts together. So thanks for your involvement here, and hopefully we can keep working on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. I feel exactly the same way. I was very heartbroken by some of the testimony today, again. And so I look forward to continuing to work on this with you and with members of the community.
Deputy Mayor Kine, there was some analysis or study done, I think in 2018 or 2019. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the analysis that we did as part of our engagement process on this very question, Chairman?
I think so.
Yes, we did extensive analysis. We shared that with the community, posted it publicly, got feedback. In fact, we got additional questions on analyses. We went back and did some more work. So yes, there was extensive analysis done at that time on the question of a middle school in this neighborhood. It's all posted on the DCPS website.
It's on the DCPS website.
Yes.
Because we can find there the 2020 analysis, but I don't know that we can find the 2018, 2019 analysis.
We'll be very happy to work with your office, Chairman, to make sure you have all of it.
Okay. Let me just see if I have any other questions. Give me a second here. I think I'll leave it at that. Clearly, there's concern from the community. Clearly, there's concern from council members. So we will continue to pursue this. We'll see what the budget says next week. Of course, the challenge with the next hearing we have on the budget is that it will be on the entire budget and all the issues. So I don't know that that would be a good opportunity for us to revisit this issue or to revisit with any detail. But we're not done with this issue. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kine. Let me just close out this hearing. So this has been a hearing on the status of DCPS Middle School in Center City. I didn't say this at the beginning, but the record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, it will close at 5 p.m. on Thursday, March 24th. So there were a couple witnesses who didn't submit statements. Deputy Mayor, I think you said you might be getting back with some data in response to Councilmember Nadeau. If you would share that with the committee. And anybody else who wishes to submit comments, 2 weeks to do so. Thank everybody for testifying. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The time is 11:56.